Why do some ex-Muslim atheists call themselves cultural Muslims? How are these cultural Muslims causing harm in the world, even if they don't believe in Islam? And while we're on the subject, what exactly is a cultural Muslim anyway? Hey everybody, Secular Spirit here, and this video is about something I've noticed ever since I left Islam back in 2006. Many Muslims around the world are growing increasingly fundamentalist and extreme in their religious beliefs. But there also seems to be another, perhaps parallel emerging phenomenon, the cultural Muslim, a person who no longer believes in the supernatural claims of their faith. They don't think Allah is actually out there monitoring our bathroom activity to make sure we say the correct dua before and after going number 2 or roasting disbelievers in hell. They don't think Shaitan is whispering in our ears, tempting us into ordering the McDonald's pork McRib, an egregious sin whether you're a religious or an atheist, or seducing Muslim women into exposing scandalous tufts of hair outside of their hijabs. Those cultural Muslims who sometimes call themselves secular Muslims fit the description of an atheist or an agnostic. They don't believe and or don't know if Allah is real, and yet they preserve a partial Muslim label. They'll explain this is because they see a lot of value in Islam, which over the past 1400 years has deeply embedded itself into the culture, traditions, and even architecture of a major part of the world, particularly in the Middle East and North Africa. In the case of Arabic speakers, the Arabic of the Quran has had a profound impact on the development of the modern form of the language. And it's also the primary tool used to teach Arabic to hundreds of millions of non-Arab Muslims in countries like Pakistan and Indonesia. If you look at a community in Cairo or Baghdad, or even sizable Muslim communities in places like Dearborn, Michigan, or Birmingham, England, social life revolves around Islamic rituals. The adhan, the call to prayer, blares out 5 times a day to initiate the gathering of Muslims at the local mosque, often a large building that stands distinctly in the landscape, while Muslim children are sent to Islamic centers for classes and activities. Framed Quran verses adorn the walls of homes, shops, and restaurants. During Ramadan, the entire community comes together for a whole month, of socializing with fellow Muslims the priority, and business and work becoming almost a secondary consideration. Even daily conversations in these communities are filled with Islamic words like inshallah, or if God wills it, and mashallah, or God has willed it. Growing up, I'd cringe time and time again as I'd hear these familiar words from a distant relative or family friend. Mashallah shukabran, which loosely translates to, by God's will, look how much you've grown. While inshallah is a versatile phrase that can be used as a response for pretty much anything, even coming in handy for things you want to avoid. For example, if your parents start pressuring you to get married, you can acceptably end the conversation by simply saying, inshallah, because after all, it is God's will. It's often the case that the cultural Muslim is someone who has detached from their Muslim community, perhaps after moving away from family, maybe to live in a country like the US or the UK, and yearns to reclaim what they've lost, their pride in their Muslim traditions and heritage, which make them feel part of something bigger than themselves. This is especially important for those who feel lonely or perhaps purposeless in life, in some instances specifically because they don't believe in a God anymore. The cultural Muslim will treat mosques and religious sites like those in Mecca with reverence and admire their beauty, and some, including ones I know in my personal life, will celebrate Eid or fast for Ramadan. They'll abstain from eating pork or support the hijab for Muslim women, even if they don't believe in the reasons for these things. By doing this, they connect to their roots and they take comfort in centuries-old traditions. They remain a part of the wider Muslim community and feel solidarity with them. So what's the harm in that, some of you might ask? Alongside its comforting traditions, Islam even has good teachings, although some might be contravened by contradictory teachings that exist in the Hadith or the Quran. Teachings like helping others and treating them with respect, valuing people over material possessions and money, being humble and modest. But here's the other aspect of Islam that comes with all those positives. Its toxic worldview that hangs heavy over the air in Muslim communities, the intolerance and or judgment of other religions and LGBTQ people, the widely accepted misogyny that tells women what they can or can't wear, the obsession with restrictive fixed gender roles in society, the fatalistic and passive view towards life that relies on Allah to justify and explain everything, especially when there is no justification or explanation. Allah will fix it. Allah knows best. Allah allowed this to happen for good reason. This life isn't important. It's fleeting compared to the afterlife, so don't worry about whatever it is. Your dead loved one killed in the car accident, or suffering from cancer. It's all right. That whole big problem of climate change, we're just weak, fallible human beings anyway, and even if we could, why do something about it? If anything, it might be a sign of the coming judgment day and afterlife that we're looking forward to anyway. When someone takes the steps of calling themselves a cultural Muslim and speaks positively about how Islam is valuable and meaningful even without belief, they are enabling those toxic things because they are infused in Islam. They are inseparable from its core. Some of these cultural Muslims will even defend the Prophet Muhammad from critics who highlight his marriage to a 6-year-old child, his marriage to 11 women, his condoning of slavery and sex slavery, or his involvement in dark incidents like the execution of all the men of an entire Jewish tribe, which I talk about in this video linked in the description below. This all wouldn't be a major problem for others if it wasn't for the fact that Islam is a global force actively harming people across the world. And taking that step of calling yourself a cultural Muslim condones and enables that harm as acceptable. See, that's the difference compared to calling yourself something like a cultural Norse mythologist, if something like that exists today. Norse mythology has a minor role in the world. Very few people today take it seriously or teach it to children as the truth of reality. Calling yourself a cultural Muslim, on the other hand, can carry a big impact, especially if you're representing this more palatable version of Islam, Islam light, that will mislead non-Muslims. Non-Muslims will see the cultural Muslim who speaks highly of Islamic art and the beauty of Quran recitations and the egalitarianism of the pilgrimage, the Hajj to Mecca, and they'll think, well, this person has gay friends and his wife doesn't wear hijab. Maybe Islam just gets a bad rap from all those Islamophobes. But the reality is that this Islam light, this neutered Islam, is not the Islam that many Muslims around the world practice. The Islam that represses and controls through fear and its ancient backwards morality built on irrational blind faith. Much like the reformist Muslims, and by them I mean the moderate, still believing Muslims trying to get rid of the violent and misogynistic aspects of Islam, cultural Muslims have placed themselves in a position where they want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to preserve Islam because it matters a lot to them, but they don't want to be beholden to what Islam entails in terms of beliefs and practices. Those cultural Muslims are attempting an impossible balancing act that I don't envy, trying to enjoy the perks of Islamic traditions while not believing the worldview that underpinned them. That's why their efforts are doomed to fail. Ultimately, they're doing a hollow performance designed to comfort themselves. It's a superficial act, not that different from non-Muslims who decorate their homes with Quran verses or get tattoos of Islamic art without understanding the meaning or the contextual significance. If anything, the cultural Muslims are actually worse because they generally do understand the meaning and contextual significance, and yet they'll disregard their harms and will proudly display them anyway. For me personally, I experienced a separation and loss after I left Islam as a teenager. But I didn't take the step of proclaiming myself a cultural Muslim. I didn't continue to follow the traditions or celebrate Islamic holidays. I had to distance myself from them because I understood very well how harmful their Islamic foundations were and continue to be for so many people in the world. It took me many years of searching to figure out who I am and what matters most to me. But in that journey, I've discovered that there's a life beyond Islam and its community, that all the benefits it provides, a sense of togetherness and meaning and celebration of life, can be experienced without associating myself with Islam. There's plenty of things that connect us without any organized religion, and it's a personal journey for each and every one of us to figure out what those things are. For me, it varies from things like sports, like soccer, to movies, books, to even lousily playing the guitar, and finding others that also resonate with those things to come together and celebrate them. So what's left of Islam in my life today? Not much. When I'm talking to Arabs or Muslims, including people in my family, and inshallah or Allahu Alam, Allah knows best, will slip out, almost because it's a reflex, a normalized part of the language, as much as I try to avoid it. I haven't stepped in a mosque in years, and I have no interest in being in one. As much as I can admire the beauty of its architecture, it's hard to ignore the toxic spiritual foundations the mosque is built on. And as much as the Quran sounds so beautiful when recited, it's hard to ignore the ugliness of the meaning of its words. I accept Islam as part of my roots, as something that shaped my ancestors and me, so I can then put it in its historical place and move on past it. The only significant way that Islam is part of my life is through this channel focused on moving past Islam and organized religion. This too comes from how I found a purpose outside of Islam, to express myself creatively on the things that matter to me, and to stand up against the things that are holding humanity back. And one of those things is organized religion and its irrational, blind faith. And yet, sometimes I still miss the comfort of being Muslim and being part of its about 2 billion strong community. I can see how for many cultural Muslims, Islam can fill a void. The void that Islam indoctrinates all Muslims to believe that only it can fill. That's why I understand, I get it, the desire to cling to Islam's comforts. But when we see that they're based on the thin air of blind faith and robotic adherence to tradition, and harming so many people, we have to acknowledge those realities and let go of those comforts. Instead of marching to the tune of the drum of Islam, former Muslims, whether they label themselves as cultural Muslims or not, should be brave and move on past the Muslim identity and create a new one. This seems impossible because of how embedded Islam is within Arabic identity, Middle Eastern identity, and the identity of people across the Muslim world. But the longer we take to shed the Muslim label, to shed Islamic traditions from our day-to-day lives, the longer we'll delay moving past Islam and relegating it to the same position that Norse mythology has in Scandinavia, or ancient Greek gods have to Greeks today. That's all from me. Thanks, as always, for watching. Please like this video and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll be back with another video very, very soon.